With over 2.5 million Ukrainians now refugees, the government's plan to help will be announced later today. And as the war makes our cost of living crisis even worse, what might the government do to help hard-pressed families? Joining me in the studio is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, it is good to see you, as ever. So the government have been criticised for not doing enough on refugees. This afternoon we're expecting a statement. Tell us what we might expect in that statement.
Well, there's certainly been a great deal of criticism over the last week. It reached really fever pitch because of this visa process that the UK government has set out. Unlike the EU, where there's a visa waiver, the UK needs to physically process applications from Ukrainians. So that does take time. There were very small numbers at the start of last week, but as of 2 p.m. yesterday, the UK has now processed 4,000 Ukrainian visas. So that's a huge jump on where we were even just a few days ago. We can imagine those numbers are going to climb as the processing gets underway. But now these visas have been processed, the question is what happens to these people when they come to the UK? And that's what this statement today is all about. That's what Michael Gove is setting out now. Individual families will be able to offer up a spare room in their home or indeed another property that they own, provided it's offered rent-free to Ukrainians who want to come and live in the UK. And for doing that, these families will be given £350 a month in order to sort of help with that burden, if you will. But also local authorities will be given considerable funds as well. Local authorities will be given £10,500 per refugee, with more for refugees of school age. So that's on top of the £350 per family that take in refugees. We're talking about considerable sums of money here.
Why is Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, making the announcement this afternoon? Why not Priti Patel, the Home Secretary?
Well, if you were to ask the government that question, they would say that Michael Gove is the Housing Secretary, and this is, of course, a policy about people offering their homes and how refugees may be homed in the UK. Although, if you're to take a slightly more critical eye of what's going on here, this is a visa scheme. The Home Office deals with visa schemes, and although the Housing Secretary and the Home Secretary might sound similar linguistically, they're very different departments. Priti Patel has come under a huge amount of criticism over the last couple of years when it comes to not only her attitude when dealing with questions of refugees and asylum seekers, but also competence. And this is something that the Liberal Democrats picked up on as a party over the weekend. They've called on the Home Secretary to resign. There has been significant pressure on the Home Secretary. Now, defenders of Priti Patel would say that she's working within a department that has never liked her as Home Secretary, and they say that the civil servants within the Home Office have been rubbing up against the Home Secretary, and there has not been a particularly good working relationship there. Although the critics of Priti Patel say that she is not getting a grip of the situation, that she is not competent enough at handling the situation there. Whatever the truth of it, the government clearly thinks that Michael Gove is someone who has a track record in delivering things, whether it was education reform, whether it was no-deal planning and Brexit, whether it was when he was agricultural secretary and managed to do just about the only thing that the government was doing in some of those Theresa May years when they couldn't pass anything. It was just Michael Gove doing environmental policy. He's seen as someone who delivers, a safe pair of hands, and that is likely why he's been placed in charge of this sensitive scheme.
How straightforward is it going to be to help? Because it's been reported that it's not a case of going on a website and then the Home Office will say, OK, here is X person, possibly with child, who will be coming to you for refuge. You have to match up yourself or something, or? You
certainly do. You're not going to be directly allocated by the government, but equally you're not going to have to go and seek out individuals in Ukraine. Right. What likely will happen is the charitable sector comes in the middle there, is sort of that middleman between individuals and government. So there are these individuals who are going to be proposed and are seeking visa status in the UK, and that visa allows them to stay in the UK for 3 years. It allows them access to all of the public services we enjoy in the UK, the NHS, education, whatever else it might be. But also it allows them to work. So that's another aspect of that visa. Really quite generous visa for 3 years. But in order to match those people up, there are a number of charities working already within this country who have worked on previous refugee schemes as well, who will be acting as middlemen here between families who want to take in refugees, who have capacity to take in in refugees, perhaps spare rooms and the like. Those people will be able to match up with charities who will do really the legwork mostly here to make sure that the right people are matched up. But also there is a degree of security. The families offering to house particularly vulnerable women and children will need to be vetted for obvious reasons, and equally refugees coming to the UK will be vetted as well. That's the whole point of the visa scheme. So many moving parts to this. You can see why it's taken some time to set up.
Now, let's move on to the cost of living crisis. We've got that mini budget. I think it's a week on Wednesday now, the 23rd, isn't it? Rishi Sunak is still under pressure to scrap, not just from the opposition parties, but also from his own side, many on his own side, to scrap that national insurance tax rise that we're all going to be hit with next month. They seem to be holding firm, though, that we're all going to be subject to it, despite the cost of living increase.
They do, for the moment, and this was a more live question maybe 1 or 2 months ago at the height of the crisis around Boris Johnson's leadership. They seemed to be erring. Boris Johnson gave a number of interviews where he seemed to be opening the door to the question of whether or not this tax rise will go ahead. However, about a month and a half ago, the government came down firmly on the side of this tax rise is going ahead, the catch-up funding is needed for the NHS, the social care crisis is needed to be assessed, and that needs fundamentally more cash. The tricky question is now, though, this is coming in at a time of a particular cost of living crisis, at a time when the government is being asked by many to provide extra cash for people to ease that cost of living. And if you're, as a government, you're giving cash with one hand and taking from the other, it strikes many people as really quite odd. However, from the government's point of view, they have set this train in motion now. The tax rise is coming in at the start of next month. To change everything now might be a stretch too far. That being said, there's maybe a political calculation here as well. I was talking about the timing of that national insurance rise happening at a time of cost of living crisis. That is very difficult. Potentially it's more difficult for government, if they're going to go ahead with this at all, to bring in that tax rise closer to an election. Doing the tax rise this year as opposed to next year or the year after might ameliorate the damage politically an extra tax hitting people might do if it comes further down the line.
Tom Harwood, as ever, thank you very much indeed.